Can you hear me at the back?
19.
That's all right, Scott.
Yeah, so bad, many years.
Right, lads, we're just about ready to start. Can you hear me at the back? No. That's okay. I'm like hoping. Anyway, I don't think we really need any introduction. But anyway, I'm just going to give him one. And as far as I'm concerned, he's an icon, a legend in Scottish rugby. Has 25 caps. His first cap against France in 1986. And the reason I know that is I was at the game. I also went to the dinner in the evening because I was president of the squad. So he has 2 lines further test trips. No doubt we'll cover some about these. But without any more ado, I welcome Scott Hastings.
Thank you very much. Normally I don't use a microphone and everybody's actually half deaf, so when you're changing your earpieces and then I have to wake you up about 20 minutes in, but what a lovely welcome. Very level-headed gentleman here. He dribbles out both sides of his mouth. That's a fine game. He's on the phone. Who's that? Who's that?
Scott, my brother.
Scott, get off the bloody phone. It's Scott Hastings here. Right. What? To stop and get something. All right, okay. You get a bottle of whiskey at the off license. You get alcoholic. I'm delighted the bar's not open. Anyway, I won't welcome. God, it's been a long bloody month, isn't it? 31st of January, beautiful day, beautiful conditions. I hope you're all well. And of course, looking forward to Saturday and the Calcutta Cup and everything that entails. So I thought I would just have a wee chat about my kind of rugby, my upbringing, and the Hastings name synonymous with Scottish sport. I normally get introduced as Gavin's brother. But now that my nephew Adam, who plays for Gloucester Rugby, also plays for Scotland, I get introduced as the uncle. But no, it is Scott Hastings. And I have to remind people that I am actually the most capped Hastings in the history of the game. I've got 65 caps. My brother's got 61. Adam's got, I think, 21. He's not involved in the squad, so I'm delighted about that because it means he doesn't get any more caps. But seriously, hopefully he'll bounce back and he takes great enjoyment. I was born in Edinburgh, still living in Edinburgh, born and bred, beautiful city. I was very lucky to go to school at Watson's College, George Watson's. There was 4 brothers actually. My eldest brother Graham, we kicked him out, he lives in Australia now. My brother Gavin, who you know, he only got 62 caps, by the way, for his country. I got 65. Then I have a younger brother called Ewan. So there was 4 Hastings brothers. We actually never played rugby in the same team. It was always our wish and desire to do so. My eldest brother, who's 62, is back this summer. So who knows, we might just pull the boots on for one more time, not. The thought of tackling, because when we were growing up as a family, it was mayhem in the Hastings household. How my mum coped, how my dad, with the windows around the house, when footballs went through panes and glasses, when fights would break out in the back garden. I don't know, if it was the 6 or the 5 nations at the time, the rugby ball was always out. If the cup final was on, the footballs would be out. Wimbledon would be on, we'd be out there with a string across the middle of the garden, battering back the tennis balls. And of course, when the cricket was on with England playing the Ashes, we would mow our own wicket, we'd paint our own lines. So it was a very happy household, happy upbringing. And it always saddens me when I hear that families who perhaps split, who've not had that opportunity to be together, or there's not been siblings around in the house. But our kitchen was the sort of central place of the household, and every evening we'd sit, and it would always be rugby. And if my mum would stop the rugby, we'd move on to golf. And if she said too much golf, we'd move on to football. It was sport, sport, and more sport. And Sunday walks were always great fun up on the Brave Hills. And of course, Saturdays, we just went down to Marside, the home of Watsories. My father was a former Watsorian. He also played for London Scottish. I think he played for Edinburgh on one occasion against Glasgow, which was the big intercity derby. And he was a number 8, had to retire a little bit early with golf problems, was determined to be a professional golfer. He got down to a 1 handicapper. But his father said, no, you're going to be an accountant like me, so he became a bean counter. Unfortunately, he never passed any of his accountancy skills or brains down to his sons, but the sporting gene was certainly there, as was my mother, who was a keen golfer, a curler, and also a hockey player. So great fun in terms of schoolboy rugby, taking all the boys across Edinburgh to play their schools. And it was a real logistical exercise when once one of my brothers might be playing at Marside at Watson's at 9:30, I'd be down at Golden Acre at 10:30, summer would be on the other side of town. It was absolutely mayhem on a Saturday, but on Saturday afternoons, all with the tracksuit, down to Marside, where inevitably it was always football we played, never rugby. But eventually that round ball turned into practicing with the oval ball. And it was great. It was great fun, sort of always being at Marside. You know, similar to here, you'll have kids playing out here. They come into the bar, they get their can of Coke, their crisps, and you go back out, and you might get a little bit of light off the side of the street lights, so you can play your sport. People often said to me that why was Gavin a great goal kicker and why was I a great tackler? Well, the funny thing was that we used to get my younger brother involved. My brother would practice his goal kicking. My younger brother would catch the ball, and I'd absolutely smash him with a tackle as he brought the ball back so that Gavin could have another kick. Meanwhile, my older brother would sort of be nipping into the clubhouse and nicking a pint of beer because he was a wee bit older than us, aged 12. But interestingly enough, it was Graham, my eldest brother, who went on, he played for Scottish schools, and played for Scotland under 21s, who kind of got the ball rolling in terms of representative rugby. And then Gavin latched on to that, played for Edinburgh schoolboys all the way through, Scottish schoolboys, and captained them. So it was a piece of cinch for me. I used to pitch up at the schoolboy trials, and I used to stand there, and it was a case of name, please, Hastings. Scott, yes. You're not related to Gavin and Graham Hastings, are you? Yes. Oh, right, you're in the team then. So I didn't really have to play, so that was tremendous. I just waltzed in the team. But you suddenly realise that this great game can give you so much. And as a schoolboy, I captained Scottish schoolboys. And I often talk about the circles of life in terms of what brings us together. And on that occasion, we got absolutely stuffed by the Australian schoolboys in 1982. But in that team, there was something like a dozen of the Australian schoolboys that went on to be capped for the Wallabies. And there was about 3 of the Scottish schoolboys that got capped for Scotland later on. A guy called Adam Buchanan Smith, who played some great rugby, I think, latterly at Heriots. He was a back and forward. Jeremy Richardson, who played the Edinburgh Ackies, and they were my schoolboy buddies. But for Australia, there was a certain young man called Michael Liner, and would you believe that he got capped for Australia? I played against him in a Scotland jersey and a British Lions jersey, and we ended up commentating together. And would you believe, a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if some of you were watching, but there was a New Year's Day game at Gloucester between Gloucester and Harlequins. And here is my brother Gavin, along with Michael Liner, who's on the pitch. But there's a young Liner playing for Harlequins, and there's a young Hastings playing for Gloucester. So it's amazing how that sort of that era has spawned not only friendships but rivalry, and now their sons are now playing against each other, and still, whilst being paid thousands to play the game, still reveling in the fact that it means a lot to them. So that was kind of my schoolboy upbringing. Thoroughly enjoyed playing schoolboy rugby, but ended up as a student down in Newcastle. And interesting enough, if you're ever in a pub quiz and people ask you, name the Scotland rugby player who never played for a rugby club, well, that was me. Because the Watsonian Football Club is actually called a football club, and I went and played for the Northern Football Club, both founded in 1875. I played for the Northern Football Club down in Newcastle, also played for the Barbarian Football Club. So I've actually never played for a rugby club, and those of you who know your history, there was association football and there was football. Association football was the soccer game, football was the rugby game, but ultimately they had to change names. But Watsonians and the Northern Football Club have retained their WFC, NFC sort of title. So that might get you a bottle of whiskey or something like that in the sports quiz. So good luck when that question comes up. So I ended up down in Newcastle as a 17-year-old. I played for the Newcastle Northern team. I pitched up with a mate of mine, and we asked to get a game at Newcastle Northern. Didn't know much about it. Was told it was quite a social club. And on the other side of the road, the Great North Road, was Gosford. And Gosford now became the Newcastle Falcons. But Gosford were the preeminent team. People like Roger Utley, a few of you might remember that name in years gone by. And Roger Utley and Malcolm Young, who was a scrum half, Colin White, all played for Gosford. And the big rivals across the road were Northern. Well, I played my first game for Northern for a third team. First time I got the ball, caught the ball, a couple of side steps, scored a try. The opposition kicked off, I caught the ball again, went the length, and somebody was dispatched across to the first team pitch to send a selector over. And blow me, the next week I was playing for their first 15, and a few weeks later I was playing for the county team, playing for Northumberland County. So I was kind of on my way and on the radar for the Anglo-Scots, but Watsonians in those days, in the early 80s, were always struggling in the top division, so they decided to get me back. So I flitted between Newcastle and Watsonians, playing for them, as I studied my course down at the Newcastle Polytechnic. Had great fun as a student down there, played a bit of student rugby. But the big thing for me was that I played in my first year out of school, 17 years of age into 18. I played 50 games of 15s rugby and 14 sevens competitions, and I still had 3 weeks of the season left. So as a youngster, I knew that I couldn't keep that up. And so I always used to sort of tailor the amount of games I kind of used to play to ensure that I only played probably about 20-25 games max in any one season, plus some sevens competitions on that. But it was a real lesson now that you can actually have too much of the game. And I actually got injured, so it forced me to stop in that very first season. That was my student days. I went overseas and came back to the league set up in Scotland in 1985. And on my very first week back from sort of travelling overseas, I was playing against Jed Forrest for Watsonians in a league match when all the selectors were there. I managed to get a hat-trick of tries, and then it became on to Edinburgh. And of course, the old Inter-District Championship was tremendous fun with Edinburgh, Glasgow, the Northern Midlands, the south of Scotland, and the Anglo-Scots. Of course, in those days, early 80s, 85, 86, was the Borders, was the stronghold of the game. Remember, 1984 was Scotland's only second Grand Slam. Jim Aiken had captained that particular team. The amount of Scots, border folk in the Scotland team then, people like Alan Tomes, Jim Aiken, Roy Laidlaw, John Rutherford, John Jeffrey, Gary Callender, all these guys played and plied their trade in the Borders. So the south of Scotland was strong. But we also knew for Edinburgh, as we went through from our club teams, that the Calder brothers, the David Soul, the Johnson brothers, the Richardson brothers, we were right on top of our game. And we thought that we could outdo the South team. And as a result, the Edinburgh team became very, very successful. We won back-to-back championships for 3 years on the trot. And that whole sort of era kind of changed, and there was a shift up into Edinburgh for the majority of the Scotland team that then represented, that was represented from Edinburgh into the Scotland team. So 1986, we'll just keep going forward a little bit. The January 1986, as you mentioned earlier on, it just so happened that as a month after my 21st birthday, after a very successful Scotland trial, both Gavin and myself were capped for our countries. Now imagine these days, you're a week out from playing for Scotland versus England. You've got this game on Saturday, and you're in Gregor Townsend's squad, and you get told that you're playing for Scotland. You're delighted, you're over the moon. But you know what? You can't go on the piss. You can't celebrate. You can't have a beer. Well, below me, Gavin and I drank for the first week. And of course, in our days, we were wrapped up in cotton wool the week before the game. So there was much excitement, tremendous celebration, as both of us made our debuts against France. Funny enough, my first game was about 70, I've got to be careful here with my maths, so it was 76. I was at Murrayfield with a young mate of mine. I was, 12 years of age, my first game at Murrayfield. We're in the Old West Stand, and we are cheering on Scotland. Come on, Scotland! And we get a tap about 20 minutes in. Boys, Scotland are actually playing white today. And that's France who cheering. Anyway, we realised because this old couple, they got out their flask at half-time, pretty cold day, and they poured this soup into it. It was this rich, clear soup. I'd never had consomme before, but we were giggling away all the second half. It was laced with sherry. But we cheered on Scotland. God knows, I don't even know what the score was in 76, but would you believe it that in 1986, 10 years later, never would I ever have dreamed I'd be playing. But of course, my dream was playing in a blue jersey. And my first jersey was a white one. And there's a photograph of Gavin and I. We look like a couple of virgins in our white. You know, there's no branding, there's no nothing, there's just that thistle. But what pride, what a fantastic occasion. It was a tremendous, Scotland won 18-17. Bugger loves Gavin, kicked 6 penalties that day to set a new world record on a debut, and we played out of our skins. It was only my third game, incidentally, playing as a centre. I'd never played centre before. I had been playing fly half and fullback all the way through my career, and although I was telling you there that I was playing for Edinburgh, I wasn't actually playing for, my brother Gavin wasn't playing for Edinburgh, he was playing for the Anglo-Scots. Because at that time he was at Cambridge University. Now, he enjoyed sweeping up the floors and the changing rooms at Cambridge University. He certainly wasn't studying it. Although he tells me he was doing a course in land economy, so I think I was more about cutting the grass and saving money. But anyway, Gavin was playing for the Anglo-Scots, so there was a bit of debate where I was going to actually play my rugby, so I ended up in the Scotland trial playing centre, having never played there in my puff, apart from one club game. And my third game was against some guy called Philippe Silla, who was winning his 42nd cap for France. So, as I say to people, excuse my language, I was shitting myself before the game. I was so uptight, and I look at these young professionals now, and they seem to be full of confidence, and there's a grace about them. And I don't know if that's because they're just used to that environment and their training environment, but hey, listen, I was a young virgin in the international pitch, and boy, did we have some party that night in the Carlton Highland Hotel, 1817, and that was it. You're on the ladder, and once you're on that ladder, you want to get to the next ladder, and the next game, and that Five Nations Championship actually, we won that. We shared it with France. Gavin, incidentally, just on going back onto that French game, he kicked off, and I don't know if you remember that particular game, but he put it out on the full. So as in those days, we all trotted back to the scrum, and I'm trotting back, to get into position. I turn around, and there's 3 Frenchmen running at me. And I looked round, and I didn't know what was happening, but they scored under the posts, or beside the post. And we're standing underneath. This is the first minute of international rugby. And we're 4-0 down. In those days, the try was a 4. And I turned around to John Beattie. He's got, what, 40-odd caps for Scotland. I said, John, what's happened? He says, I don't know. I haven't a bloody clue. They missed the kick. And so it was only 4-0. None of us knew what happened. Of course, the law in those days said you could either take a line out or a scrum. But of course, because every team in club rugby, world rugby would always go to the scrum, we were outfoxed because Pierre Benizzi, the French scrum half, knew exactly the laws of the game and took a quick line out. Oh my goodness, what a baptism of fire that was. I talked to you about winning my first cap, and I thoroughly enjoyed that, but it was a white jersey. I always wanted to get that blue jersey, and I did get my first blue jersey against Wales. Unfortunately, that was a loss down in the Cardiff Arms Park, magnificent game. But I got back up to Murrayfield to play against the old enemy Calcutta Cup, and I just see there's a touch flag there from 2005 when England played Scotland. The Calcutta Cup is the most amazing game to play in. There's just something utterly unique. It's the biggest and longest international sporting fixture around, and it's just tremendous to be part of. I was part of a team that won that day 33 points to 6, which was a record score, the most points ever scored against England until a few years ago when there was that draw down in Twickenham, 38-all. So that was an amazing day to get my first try for Scotland, a thrashing of England. But the build-up to that game was amazing. I always remember as a school kid, there was a director of Hamilton and Inches, and he used to bring the trophy into George Watson's school, and we used to be able to handle this trophy. It was magnificent, and the craftsmanship and silversmith within that trophy was absolutely amazing. So it was embedded in me, this particular game, the Scotland-England games, where I used to get dropped off at my grand's and we used to watch it on the telly as my mum and dad went off to Murrayfield. And you always used to watch PC Brown down at Twickenham, wiping his nose, kicking the ball. And just, you never realised you were going to be part of it. And I actually scored my first try against England in that 33-6 win. The last try of the game, it was tremendous. And we watched the next day in the Golf Tavern in Brunsfield, when Rugby Special used to come on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, there was 13 of the 15 team that took the field that day in that pub on the Sunday, still celebrating the next day. A lot of people ask me, do you not wish you'd played in the professional era? And my answer is, I value my friendships more than my finances. And that's maybe the old way of thinking. And yeah, you can look back now and think, yeah, I could have done with a few extra £1,000 in the bank, but ultimately the friendships I made in this great game was phenomenal. I suppose the next kind of highlight was just to give you the transition of how the game was going. It was in 1987. It was the first ever Rugby World Cup. I went down under full of expectation, having been a new cap onto a world stage. But unfortunately, I pulled a hamstring in training, and although I got back to playing, I had one of the most embarrassing games that I'd ever been involved in. It was against Romania at Carisbrooke. It was never a great ground for me, but Gavin decided to come up with a switch kick-off, so rather than kicking it to the left, to the forwards, he kicked it to the right. I passed all my fitness tests. I wasn't that confident about playing. I tried to withdraw from the game, but the management, the senior management of the Scotland team said, no, you must play. If you don't play, you won't play against the All Blacks the following week in the quarter-final. And so we did this switch kick-off, and I ran across the halfway line up to the 10-yard line, and my hamstring went. I was off the pitch within 10 seconds. So the World Cup in '87 was not exactly great for me. But also knew in that cycle that in a couple of years' time, there was opportunities to get back into the Scotland team, but also opportunities to play for a team called the British and Irish Lions, who were due to go on tour in Australia. And I suppose the Lions was the big sort of step up into the real international stage where the top players from England, Ireland, Wales and Scotland got together. And I used to go, and of course it was amateur these days, I had a job in an advertising agency, and it was go to my boss, knock on the door, hey, Ron, I need some time off. Oh, yeah, where are you away to this time? He says, I'm away down to Australia, I'm playing for the British Lions. All right, how long do you need off? I said, 8 weeks. And, oh right, that's a bit of a problem, but we managed to get there. So, of course, as an amateur rugby player, 8 weeks in Australia, phenomenal. But it was a great opportunity because my mum and dad flew out. My elder brother was in Melbourne at that point in time, still lives there to this day. And again, both Gavin and I were just absolutely honoured to represent the Lions, playing in the second and third test. I didn't play the first test again because of injury, but we won the series over there when Ian McGeechan was the wonderful Lions coach that opened up our eyes to the possibilities of playing some great rugby with some great people, and also playing just understanding what it's like to play with other international players at such a high level. So delighted to win that particular series and came back high as a kite, thinking, right, this is on. I'm going to really establish myself as a player. I was under a wonderful captain, Finlay Calder, out of Stuart's Melville Club, who was just a wonderful leader, an incredible man. Very shy, unassuming, and he would always stay under the radar in terms of limelight, in terms of media exposure, but did all his talking on the pitch and in the changing room beforehand. And what an inspiration he was as a captain. So fast forward then on to the next season, and a certain season in 1990 when Scotland last won the Grand Slam. It was an incredible occasion, 17th of March 1990. I'm sure many of you may remember it quite well. I get a little bit embarrassed, to be honest with you, talking about it. And the reason being is I think that Scotland should be winning more Grand Slams, more titles. But they're bloody tough to win, I can tell you that. But I look with envy at Ireland and Wales and what they've managed to achieve by getting that winning formula. And I hope that Gregor Townsend's team, from their experience of last year, can actually drive them forward this year. I'm full of optimism, but England will be a tough nut to crack. They're well coached by Eddie Jones. But in 1990, we had the opposition pretty well sussed, because in '89, the majority of the England players that we've been on tour with in the Lions tour were playing against us, and we knew headlines, we knew how to outwit them. Funnily enough, go back to 1983, when there was a Lions tour to New Zealand. There was a number of Scots and a guy called Jim Telfer, who was coach of the Lions tour in 1983. They got beaten in the Test series 4-0. Go forward 1 year, 1984. What happened to Scotland Rugby? They got a Grand Slam because they understood that the players that they were been touring with weren't quite as good as they thought about. Happened in 1990. Last year there was a Lions tour. There was a number of Scots on that tour. Could it be a Grand Slam? You never know. But it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because you understand, as a player, the psyche that you need to perform at the highest level. And that is really important. You've got the tools, you've got the skills, you've got the players, you've got the experience. A lot of these players have got the experience of playing on European rugby over the last few years. You've got Finn Russell, who's over his spat with Gregor Townsend, who's playing some great stuff for Racing 92. He is key to Scotland, because I'm not convinced about the mercurial Finn Russell. But if he ticks, other players tick alongside him. So he needs that consistency in his performance. Our consistency was working out how to beat England in 1990. And as Kenny Milne said, there was a Five Nations Championship, there was the Calcutta Cup, there was the Grand Slam, and the Triple Crown. And he said in an interview beforehand, I hope we win one of them. So 91 was interesting because we went into another season. 5 years I've been involved with the Scotland team. It was a home World Cup. And Scotland, if they won all their games, were at home. all the way through to the semi-final and then into the final. It was a wonderful tournament. The old enemy came up to Murrayfield in '91, and they knew that they could outdo Scotland. They had been to Paris in the quarter-final, beating France over there, and I just felt that we weren't quite prepared. We didn't have the edge. They had the edge because of the hurt the year before. The Sunday after the Grand Slam game in 1990, what Surrey's were holding a Grand Slam party up at the club. We'd all had it planned. We knew what the result was going to be. The club ran out of beer, but thankfully our stewardess at the time managed to call upon some favours and get a few kegs in for the Sunday. And when we got up to this, there was a number of players. When we got up to the clubhouse, they were drinking these things called Grand Slammers. It's a good one. Tequila and champagne. Grand Slammers. So get the tequila ready for the bar for the Irish game. And there was a guy, so Brian Moore was there that day with Chris Gray, because they played in the Nottingham team, and Brian Moore, you know, probably one of the most disliked individual Englishmen around. He's bloody ugly, by the way, but a great, great friend of mine, because we toured with the Lions in '89. And Brian stood up that day, and everybody who was in that function suite, you could hear a pin drop as he congratulated Scotland. He said he was hurt, and quite rightly so, but he says the next time we play against each other, we can get our revenge. And true enough, as well as the Five Nations Championship in 1991, they came to Murrayfield, and they got their revenge, and they got through the final. We just didn't quite. At the top echelon of rugby, especially when you're putting on a Scotland jersey, I always think that if you get that chance, if you get that opportunity, if there's that pass to be made, if it clicks and you score, you're in momentum. Whereas Scotland are under pressure, we concede easy tries. For Scotland, it's always about scoring and keeping that momentum going and winning games, not by massive margins, like 20, 30 points, because Scotland have to really rise to the occasion. And my concern about Scotland in this championship coming is that can they really meet with the top packs, the French pack, the English pack, and for me, the Irish pack. For Wales, strong, yes, but we can meet that pack, we can meet the time pack. But the physicality of the game dictates the rest of the game. But more about that later, and of course we'll throw in a Q&A at the end of my little talk. You still with me?
Yes.
Yes, good. Right, so where are we? We're back in 1991. So, listen, let me kind of start to sort of accelerate through. 1983 was another great momentum for me, back on the Lions tour with my brother Gavin, who was captain on that particular tour. You look back through Lions history, it wasn't a successful tour. There was a number of injuries. I got injured before the start of the first test, had to fly home. I ran into some guy called Josh Cronfeld, who was playing for the New Zealand team. His knee happened to clatter on the side of my face, but you'd be glad to know that plastic surgery worked and all that. But again, it was the fact was my career was always about trying to play at the highest level, and of course as an amateur, to get away on these tours was just fantastic. The game was beginning to change. The demands of the game, not only on my career, I was still with that advertising agency, but the training regime was different. Weight started to become, nutrition started to become, God, we even had to do a warm-up and a warm-down. Yeah, so we weren't allowed to drink alcohol. What? That was detrimental to your performance. Bullshit. You know, but it just shows that life was going on. And I suppose, having played the '87 World Cup and the '90 World Cup, the International Rugby Board at the time, World Rugby now, decided to make this momentous decision about taking the World Cup to South Africa. South Africa, as you know, had not played in a World Cup. And sport has this unbelievable ability to cut through everything, and that indelible image of Nelson Mandela handing over the trophy to Francois Pienaar, wearing the number 6 Springbok shirt, was amazing. I don't know if you've ever seen the film Invictus? Yeah. I didn't realise the backstory to all of this. The white man's game was rugby union, yeah? And the Springboks, oddly enough, were supported by the blacks. Although it was played by majority whites, it was supported by the blacks. Almost as a protest. But the Lions were linked indelibly to South African rugby, but also this Rugby World Cup allowed them to play on the world stage. They hadn't been allowed for many, many years due to apartheid. And of course, that was a time when a certain Jonah Lomo came on the scene, and God, he ran havoc, didn't he, over Ireland, Wales. We played Scotland, played the All Blacks in the quarter-final at Loftus Versfeld. And I'd been brought back in the team because of my tackling ability to shut down Lomo. And the way we were going to play our defence is we played what's called a one-out defence. So although I played centre and I'm against a guy called Frank Bunce, I could drift out to either cover the fullback or this guy called Lomo who would run down my channel. Well, blow me, the day before the game, right, I'm opening up the Pretoria Times, and here's this article on Jonah Lomo who'd be wearing sunglasses during the game. A World Rugby had approved, the International Rugby Board had approved of this, because he had these special sunglasses. Because he knew at 4:30 at Loftus Versfeld, at 6,500 feet, the sun would be just peeking up over the top of his head. And this is the thinking, the All Blacks were going in, they knew exactly what, because Scotland would put the high ball up on Lomo, and this is our tactic. And so I'm standing there, and we did the anthems, we faced the haka, we kicked off. Zinzambrook caught the ball. One pass, straight out to Frank Bunce. Playing one out defence, Bunce to Lomo. And this guy starts running towards me. 6'5", 18.5 stone, absolute ball wrecker of a player. And he runs towards me. And I get set for the tackle. As he comes into the line of alignment, the shadow that he is running just completely casts a shadow over the top of me and go, shit, those are not sunglasses, those are his nostrils. He obviously ran over me, he used Gavin as a speed bump on the way to the try line, scores in the corner, the rest is history. Scotland knocked out the World Cup. But a great friend of mine for many years afterwards, and when Lomo used to come into Edinburgh, all he wanted to do is meet the Hastings brothers. We had great fun, just meeting quietly for a cup of coffee, and sadly he passed away in 2015. A nice little story actually for you. I was down in the Rugby World Cup final in 2015 and managed to get some tickets to the final. And I was with my daughter who plays hockey for Scotland. She's going for the Commonwealth Games, a position there. But she was playing age group hockey. And I introduced her to Jonah Lomo. She has that bloody clue who Jonah Lomo is. But on that day, New Zealand were playing Australia. She was wearing my Rugby World Cup top, my New Zealand top that I'd swapped with Frank Bunce. And it was a white New Zealand jersey, not a black one, so quite unique. World Cup logo on it. And Lomo turns around and says, "Hey, Kerry Ann," says, what do you do? And he says, "Well, I play hockey." Really interesting. And this line of people started to get his autograph. And I says, John, you got some autographs to say? No, I'm just looking at Kerry Ann. Kerry Ann hasn't a clue. So of course she looks onto YouTube and sees John Lomo score all his tries. Didn't realise what a guy was. 2 weeks later, she phones me at 7 o'clock in the morning, absolutely distraught, tears. Have you heard about Jonah Lomo? He's passed away in Dubai. And that was the effect he had on young people and people that came into his contact. He was the most wonderful individual, and sadly gone. But that was 95. So I'm coming back into the sort of back end of my career now. 96, the game went professional. I became Scotland's most capped player at the time, and it was just, suddenly things were changing within the game. There was a lot of money flying around the game, and the inevitable call came in, "Scott, you're dropped." I says, "You're not talking about Gavin?" "No, we're talking about you." And you have this chip in your shoulder, I played my last game, oddly enough, against England down in Twickenham in 1997. It was almost a record score. I was on the bench, came off the bench. I think England put 65 points past us. They were a bloody good team, they still are. And kind of, that was the way it all kind of finished for me. And although I signed a contract with Scottish Rugby for a year and a half, I told you earlier on that I value my friendships more than my finances. I was playing for the wrong reasons. And I went back to play for Watsonians, played out my career at Watsonians, played a lot of charity rugby, went overseas, went on tour, had a drink on a flight, felt hellish. That's why you're told not to drink on the flight, because if you have too much, you wake up dehydrated. That's what happens. So I tried all these things and played these wonderful games. And then I thought, well, what's going to keep me involved in the game? So to this day, the game's been very kind to me. I have the best seat in the house, commentating at Rugby World Cups with ITV. I've been on the 7th circuit for many years, commentating on 7-a-side rugby. And you know, it's just been a great sort of involvement within the game. Had that honour of being with ITV in 2019 in Japan in the Rugby World Cup, and what an experience that was. Was anybody out of Japan in the room? Oh yeah, it was just an absolute delight, wasn't it? And the compassion of these people, the Japanese, and you know, goodness me, the last couple of years, ladies and gentlemen, it's just been a really tough time for everybody. But it's lovely that we're all back here. And to see you all, to be in a packed clubhouse again, and to go to Moneyfield on Saturday to play against the old enemy. What excitement, what fantastic, what a way to kick off the Six Nations, and especially the 4:45 kickoff, because the majority of the crowd are going to be well over. People often ask me, what's my sort of, not only my greatest memory, but what's the thing I value most? And I'm a great fan of sevens rugby. And in 1996, at the back end of my career, I was playing at the Melrose Sevens. And I've been down there, and I'd played, watched as a kid this game, and not only I played for Scotland, I captained Scotland at 7-a-side rugby, and I watched this great game grow to an amazing sport. Played in the Hong Kong Sevens tournament, and by the way, if you've never been to Hong Kong, get there quickly before the Chinese really blow that place to pieces. So I'm just going to get, could somebody give me a glass of water, please? Would that be alright? Sorry, no, that's alright. But it's great. But for sevens rugby, it was very special. But in 1996, I was very fortunate to play for Watsonians. We got through to the final and beat Stellenbosch University that day. And this for me is, it kind of sums up a kind of, you know, this is my Melrose Sevens medal, gold medal, where the home of sevens rugby is. A bit like the home of golf at St Andrews. For me, this means everything. There's no money in that, it's not worth anything, but I will find well, thank you very much, I will find well the effort that went in to get that particular medal. So for me, it just it sits in his box at home, and that was a rather special occasion. Some of you may have noticed when I arrived today that I was wearing a little mask here called My Name's Donny Foundation. And Donny Beer was a great friend of mine, great adversary, and a great friend. I chaired My Name's Donny Foundation. We've raised over £8.5 million for motor neuron disease research, and that's within 4 years of starting. So the love for Donny Beer is phenomenal. Of course, a Melrose man as well. He epitomised all the fun of rugby and continues to this day. And another memento of mine involves Donny, because we got a box sent through to us recently. That's all right. And it came through, it was a box like this, and I opened it up, and there was basically every line was commemorated and given a number. Mine's 617, so I was at 617. There's less than 1,000 British and Irish lines. And there was a lovely magazine in this box. There's a letter, and he was the magazine, and there was a couple of photographs. And you'll notice it was black and white, so it's my Lions photographs in black and white, because we didn't have colour when I played. So I threw the box away. And Donnie phones me up and says, "Scotty, did you get your box?" "Yeah, yeah. What number are you?" And he says, "Oh, I think I'm 698. "Oh, I'm 617. "Well done, Donnie. It was a great experience to play for the British Lions. I've got one British Lions jersey." And that was it. He says, "No, if you look at the box," I said, "Yeah." He says, "Did you get your magazine?" "Yeah, yeah." "Did you have another look at the box?" So I went out into the rubbish bin, and I picked up a box, and I delved a little bit further. And this is what this is so I was grateful to Donnie here for my Lions cap. And I suppose, yes, I've got a Scotland cap, undoubtedly so. But as a rugby player, you don't get much in this life. Maybe the odd medal, maybe the odd trophy. But the badge means a hell of a lot. Whether that's Linlithgow, whether that is Watsonians, and whether that is Scotland or the British and Irish Lions, there's something very special about being part of a team and being part of a rugby club, because nothing I could have achieved was without support, not only of my parents, but of my wife, Jenny, and my family, and it means a lot to play for your country. And there are special moments, and so it's good fun. And that's what I love about the game, because it gives you so much fun. And although those days are kind of past me, there was a guy called Sir John Hall, who always said when the game went professional, he says, "Those who live in the past die in the past." But we can take that forward and use those experiences to be better people. And when we went to Japan, they were better people. And we can all be better people as a result of it. We have a great game, and I get really upset with other sports that don't show the same respect to a referee. I don't like the attitude of footballers shouting at linesmen. And yes, it's creeping into rugby, but our great game is about respect, is about family, is about friendship. And I suppose in many respects, that's what kind of brings us today. And it was lovely to see Fraser Faulkner earlier on come up, who was very supportive of my wife's side of the family, worked with my mother-in-law, Nancy Elms, who was a great advocate for encouraging kids and play, and their right to play as part of their education. Sadly, she passed away with motor neuron disease, and sadly, as the circles of life bring us back together again, I was, still am, a patron of MND Scotland. My friend Donnie Weir has MND. My mother-in-law had MND. Hughes van der Westhuizen, who I didn't talk about, but he was part of that World Cup winning team, the Circles of Life. I helped him in his latter stages to understand his disease. He came across when Scotland played South Africa. And there's just lovely memories all around from Gordon Dixon, who was your president here. You know, looking at that wonderful season in 2005, when he was president, and his brother Richard Dixon, who was also our Scotland coach, and great friendships and great fun to be with. So yeah, life was pretty good, and of course with Scotland playing against the old enemy, nothing could be better to kick off the Six Nations. We'll move on to Q&As now, but if you didn't enjoy my speech, my name's Gavin Hastings, but if you did, my name's Scott Hastings. It's been a pleasure to speak to you today. So, thank you very much.
We've slight change in the plan, guys. We're not having a tea and coffee this time, we're having at the end. Scott has got to go back into Edinburgh. His wife went through an operation on Friday, so he doesn't want to be away too long. So he'll now take any questions that anybody has. Okay? Jerry?
2 years ago, Scott,
Yes.
saw you at Eros.
Eros, yes, Eros Rugby Lodge.
Can you give us an update on this condition?
So Donny's actually kind of almost bucking the trend. He's a remarkable character. He normally, from diagnosis to death, is 18 months on average for motor neuron disease. Donny was diagnosed at Christmas 5 years ago. So he's still an amazing fella. His speech is beginning to go, and he's just recently got into a wheelchair. But he's still able to have his pints of Guinness, and he's still able to see friends, and he still jokes away. And behind this incredible facade is a guy who's determined. I got tipped off a number of years ago that he had motor neuron disease, and I was commentating with him at Melrose, and I'm looking for all the signs and twitches in his finger, deterioration in his speech, and none of it was there. So I just wished him all the best, and I left him. 3 weeks later, he phoned me up, and the minute that phone went, I knew exactly what he was phoning me about. He had motor neuron disease, it was confirmed. So a group of us got together, and we said we'd raise £1 million. Blow me, you know, we first of all raised a substantial $3/4 million for his trust fund. He says, I don't want any more. He says, I need to raise money for other people and to invest in research. So it was his vision to start his foundation, and as a bunch of rugby players, we thought we'd raise £1 million. We're over £8.5 million. It's extraordinary. And another $1.5 million has gone to other sufferers, because he wants other people to be helped through this dreadful disease. So life for Donny at the moment is about being around his family and his farm, and he has incredible support. I mentioned Youth Fan of West Hastings. Youth Fan of West Hastings had a bit of he was an Afrikaner with an edge to him. He wasn't, let me word this right, he was an incredible player, but he wasn't loved like Donny Weir. And Donny Weir is loved throughout World Rugby because his compassion, his tartan suits, and everything like that. So for me, he's doing really well. Can he buck the trend? Well, I have a friend of mine, Ewan MacDonald, who has a centre named after him, the Ewan MacDonald Centre for Motor Neuron Disease Research. He's 15 years with motor neuron disease. He is a bit like Professor Stephen Hawking, that he has 24/7 care. Donny doesn't want to go down that route. He doesn't want to be, because everything shuts down apart from your brain. And I don't think Donny wishes to live like that. So he'll just take every day as it comes. And we'll do as much every day to support him. But I will pass on the best wishes from the Linlithgow Rugby Club, and tell him when I speak to him next that we had a lovely morning here. So good question, thank you very much. Anybody else? Yep, sir?
Who's best centre?
Best centre?
Beside you, sir.
Beside myself, right? Okay. You might be quite surprised at this. I created a world record with Sean Levine at the time, playing with Sean Levine, my fellow Scotland centre. We played 28 times for Scotland. I came up against some brilliant players, such as Philip Sella, Frank Bunce. I suppose one of the silkiest and most difficult players to play against was Jeremy Guscott. And I was playing with Jeremy alongside Will Carling, Scott Gibbs, and myself on the '93 Lions tour. And Jeremy had burst onto the scene in '89 with Scotland, with his England cap, and got selected as an outside bet for the Lions tour, and went on to have a brilliant series for the Lions in '89. He was incredible. And at one point we were training, and we were just doing this passing movement, and Jeremy just decides to take off. And Scott, Will, and myself, we couldn't even touch his bootlaces. He was electric. And for me, Jerry Guscott played better rugby for the Lions than he ever did for England. He was a classy player. And we were rivals, but also great friends. And he was certainly one of the best players I played against in terms of the centre opposition.
Can I just take you on from that point?
Sure.
Jeremy Guscott played better for the Lions. Was that was obviously an amateur era. Was that because he was a full-time player when he was an alliance player? That was always said by Gordon Brown. I'm a
Yeah.
Gordon didn't, when he studied, said that Gordon didn't train when he went to the Lions.
I think there was a combination of the way England were coached. You know, the traditional 80s, 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s. English rugby was always based on a power pack, kicking fly half. And my era was Rob Andrew or Stuart Barnes. Stuart Barnes was the running fly half who played at Bath, who played exciting rugby. Bath were the Premiership team at the time, top team in England. Jeremy played all his rugby at Bath. But for England, his game was kind of strangled a wee bit, so he was given a bit of empowerment to play the more expansive games on tour. And yes, professionalism was probably part of that, or being on tour allowed him to become that better player. But you know, undoubtedly, he was just a class act. And he and Carling went on to, I think, take that world record. It was taken over by Little and Horan, and I couldn't tell you who the centre combination. But I'm always interested in Gregor Townsend's selection policy for the centre combination this weekend. I know this guy with that really Scottish name called Tuatha Polongo, who plays for the Glasgow Warriors, got cap. He's strong, but I think he was found out in Europe against La Rochelle recently and against Exeter. So I think they'll go for, let me see, Chris Harris in the centre, and the Glasgow 12, Sam Johnson. And I think that for this particular game is the combination to go for. But sitting in the wings is Hugh Jones, who I think is a classy player, who fell out with Townsend. Sometimes, you know, rugby sets characters against team ethics, as we saw with the Finn Russell spat. And they're difficult to sort out. We had our own challenges when we played and went on tour with Scotland, but I think the era that I played in, as players, we got in the room and we sorted it out ourselves. And I don't think that happens these days as much as it can. Yeah, very good question. Yes?
Scott, you're lucky enough to get around all the different countries and so on, they're commentating. Who are your sort of favourite players of the current era?
That's the interesting thing, isn't it? The prima donnas that are out there. Is Hoggy my favourite player? No. Very committed, very good player. His record goes, he's an amazing player. Who's my favourite player? Come on, Scotty. Who's my favourite player? I admire someone like Alan Jones. Can you imagine the amount of scrummaging sessions he's done? Can you imagine the amount of team meetings he's done? His record is phenomenal. Most capped player in world rugby. I just love to see players excel, and I think the top players always excel. And Mario Itoje is a real one. I'm intrigued with Eddie Jones that he wouldn't make him skipper, and yet he's seen qualities inside him. And yet the longevity of players is really important for players and how they bounce back. And I look at Ireland and look at their unbelievable performance against New Zealand, and just think that they're tough enough, but there's an inner quality to them that I envy, because in my day, Scotland stuffed Ireland year on year. But that's a really good question. Aaron Smith, from New Zealand, is another one. Sia Colosi, I read his autobiography, where he's come from, his resilience that he's shown. I don't think he's an outstanding player in terms of, I wouldn't put him in the top 5. But given, when I was out in when I was out in Japan, you suddenly heard from the South Africans about this backstory, about where he come from, what it would mean for the country for a black leader to lead his nation, the inspiration he would give to the country, more so than what Mandela did with Pina. This meant so much more. So I think sometimes the sport of ours can have a richer history, a richer background, a richer context. And Sia Colosi's story kind of gives that galvanises that individual team. And I think we all recognise that South Africa may not play the most attractive rugby in the world, but you still have to admire some of their qualities. So it's a really good question. I'm going to think about that and drive back to Edinburgh. I'll maybe text you another answer. But I grew up in an era when you look back to those wonderful Bill McLaren days, the Five Nations, and there were some amazing people such as the Gareth Edwards, and JPR, Serge Blanc or Philippe Sella. They're wonderful players, wonderful names that have lit up our lives. And I hope that this championship, what we forget is last year there were some fantastic games that deserve to be played in front of crowds. And this year we're going to have crowds. And I just hope that the players realise there are different ways of playing this wonderful game. And if you get the right day with the right conditions, imagine if it's like this on Saturday, it's just going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. Good question. A couple more, and my apologies that I'm changing this. My wife had an arthroscopy at St John's Hospital on Friday, and so she was a bit worried about that. I was trying to reassure her. I've had two arthroscopies and a cartilage operation. But she's on the sofa, kind of needs my help. So, last couple of questions before I kind of shoot away.
You got a question, Hank?
Where substitutions now, Scott? Too many?
Too many substitutions. This, on for your cap with 1 minute to go. It's too many. And I know there's front row issues, but at the top echelon of the game, and when you got 5 guys sitting on a bench here on a Saturday, you want these guys to play. You just want to play, and the sort of the fitness element's gone for the game because they're so professional, because they're so fit. The intensity is through to 82, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and the intensity is still there. Whereas in the old days, the tiredness, the opposition pack would get on top of you that last 10 minutes. That was all part of the game. That was part of the fabric of the game. But I understand that the game changes. So I can't do anything about it. I can't change the laws. It's just a frustration at the end of the game when you see players trot on and off, on and off. So as far as I'm concerned, rolling subs. Stick who you want to be. If there's 23, it's not a 15-man game anymore. It's a 23-man game. So have a rolling sub. And none of this. It's like football. What a bloody waste of time standing there just because a player can get clapped off. 30 players or 46 players should get clapped at the end of the game, not one individual coming off after 50 minutes. It would drive me crazy if I got subbed after 50 minutes. You want to stay on to the final minute. Yeah. That final ball, when that whistle goes and you can cuddle your team. Doesn't happen anymore. Can't do anything about it. Final question. Right your answer.
How do you rate the Barrett brothers in comparison to the Hastings brothers?
The who brothers?
Barrett.
Barrett? Never heard of them. Do you know what? Hey, they'll have some story, won't they? What a family that is, isn't it?
Wonderful.
Jordy, Barrett, there's Scotty Barrett, the second one. The funny thing is there's 2 backs and 1 forward, isn't there? You know who was eating at the family dinner table? It was Scott Barrett. But can you imagine their parents being so proud? And that's what I love now. My mum and dad, my mum sadly passed away a number of years ago, but my dad still loves supporting Adam, loves the game, and family is really important to all of us. So whoever you've got still in your life, treasure those wonderful times and those wonderful memories. And as I said, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure just to sit here, ram it away. Hope you haven't bored you too much. And, enjoy your cup of tea and your coffee.
A final question, Scott.
Final question.
Final question, Scott. I have here a photograph taken over 30 years ago. It is of you and my 16-year-old daughter.
Oh shit, we're in trouble now.
I emailed her to say you were coming here today, and I quote her response. "Oh dear, I will not make it." but I would still be weak at the knees. He is so lovely. My question is, will you sign the photograph?
If you've got a pen, I don't have a pen anyway.
That's all right.
I'll pass you back to your chair.
What can one say about that? Wonderful talk, wonderful memories, and on behalf of the local rugby club, we appreciate you taking the time to come out and speak to us, particularly as your wife isn't 100%. There's no doubt you'll be in the doghouse when you get back. Anyway, on behalf of the club, please accept that.
Oh, that's very kind.
Right over. Don't think it the way home.
All right.
Before we break up for our tea, one or two things there. As you know there, guys, you're always putting money into the kitty. Just to let you know there that over the last 4 years, we've given, we've donated to various charities over £1,600, and that's all the money that you guys get in, less the expenses. I think it's quite a marvellous idea that we're doing.
Yes.
The other thing is that we're going to try and start the walking rugby. Well, we've done it before. Obviously, in the last couple of years, we've not done it. So I'll be emailing you all to see who's interested in coming along. I don't know how many's interested. All these old individuals. The last thing is that our next meeting is the 28th of February, and the speaker should be, if providing you get thumbs up, is Jimmy Bone, who obviously called off prior to that. And we've also got one on the 28th of March, which is Bruce Jimison, our own Jim Bruce. So please, guys, have your tea, coffee, and whatever else you want, and we'll see you on the 28th. Cheers.